Let's do it. So let's do that. Hi, everyone. Welcome. And thanks so much for joining today. I'm Chris Knochel. I'm head of sales here at Marco Experiences. I'll be your moderator for today's session. And today's session is the recipe of a high-impact SKO in 2026. So that was the topic we all were really excited about. We're going to talk about what makes a sales kickoff land, maybe traps to avoid, elements about design. We really care about purpose-driven gatherings here at Marco, and so I'm excited to jump into the discussion topic. I think quickly before we do that, I just wanted to set the stage and maybe the intention, maybe a quick by way of introduction on Marco. We handle logistics on corporate travel, right? So there's a lot of things that sort of get in the way of like what kind of can result into a purpose-driven gathering. A lot of the things we focus on helping our customers do are like executive summits or company retreats or offsites. Any reason why you might want to gather, we want to get some of the logistical administrative things out of the way, like hotels, travel. So if we get that stuff out of the way, we can focus on the content. We can focus on a really meaningful gathering. One of those meaningful gatherings, something that's on people's mind right now as we kind of barrel ahead into 2026, is SKOs, sales kickoffs. And I do think that these are amazing opportunities for company alignment, vision alignment. They're also, opportunities for things to go kind of sideways. And I think we all sort of have examples of that. And so, yeah, I'm excited about today's discussion. Housekeeping items for the audience as we go along. Absolutely use the chat. I'll keep an eye on it. Let's pull some of these questions forward. We'll definitely pull them forward at the end during the Q&A section. So stay active, stay curious. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce this panel that I'm really excited about. You'll see here fantastic leaders across sort of sales, enablement, revenue. Kyle Norton is the CRO of Owner. He's the host of the Revenue Leadership Podcast. Mercy Bell comes to us from Webflow, where she leads revenue enablement. Alex Yeaton is head of go-to-market and enablement for EliseAI. We're really lucky to have him here. And there's a lot to talk about, so I want to jump in head first. With our first discussion topic, the theme is the recipe. Mercy is excited, just as I am, about metaphors and analogies. And so we're going to kind of stick and maybe beat this thing to death a little bit. But I'd love to start with you, Kyle. If an SKO is a recipe, what are the core ingredients? Let's get it started that way.
Yeah. So when I think about kickoffs or any large in-person gathering, I think about three main jobs to be done. Job number one is to drive connection. Certainly, these are opportunities that give us the ability to drive connection to a few different things, to each other, building relationships, forming trust across the team. So driving connection to your colleagues, driving to connection to your purpose. What is the purpose of the business? What are each individual's purpose or team purpose? But really reinforcing connection to purpose is number two. And then finally, to the company. You should leave people with a sense of connection to the company that and in-person moments give you that opportunity so much better than anything virtual. There's something about just being shoulder to shoulder with your colleagues. And so driving connection is number one. Building skills is number two. And we're going to talk a lot about how to do that well. It's not, a 1 hour deck that people sit through with, like a message. Okay, now go do better discovery. Building skills is about a much deeper approach. We want to go deep instead of wide. And the last job to be done of a great SKO is driving alignment. There are so many things that we're trying to direct an organization towards. Oftentimes these are big groups of people. And so you want to have a theme, a message, a mantra, a narrative that you're continuously revisiting, something that you want to leave people with as a rallying cry And again, that alignment is so much easier to do in person because you can give people exposure in multiple ways. We talk about 3 points of contact for core messaging. So what are 3 different ways you can help people rally around that message? So those in my mind are the 3 important things: driving connection, building skills, and driving alignment.
Interesting. Alex, I know you've organized a lot of these. I'm curious how you think about these approaches if the team size is different, right? So think about maybe your time at Klaviyo or here at EliseAI, but in terms of the jobs to be done, maybe tactically, how do you think about uh, those 3 jobs to be done, small team, big team, and the differences there?
Yeah, there can be a ton of nuance, right? SKO or SKO, which I've come recently to start calling it, I don't know where that came from, is it's different depending on where you are and what your goals are. Looking at the jobs to be done that Kyle mentioned, though, those tend to be the same, right? Regardless of your team size. If you're doing a SKO, you're trying to drive connection and alignment, you're trying to build skills. Again, that's pretty consistent. What I find changes is more so how you bring it to life. And I like to use frameworks for lots of things. And so for this one, I call it the 3 A's. So you've got your audience, you've got your atmosphere, and then you have your agenda. So, audience, right? Who's going to be there? Who's attending? Atmosphere, where is it actually taking place? That physical, or maybe if you have to, virtual location. And then your agenda. Like, how long should it last? And then based on that, like, what will make up, that day or those days? What will be the sessions? What will be the flow? And I thought for a while, like, how can I leave everybody with this, like, really actionable, like, super specific kind of model of, okay, if your team is X, you should do Y. But I think I kept coming back time and time again to the fact that it's not really a one size fits all. There isn't, unfortunately, a special equation. Instead, you have to look at your business and you actually have to look at quite a few variables, right? First and foremost, we can't ignore budget, right? Budget is going to play a big part in this. There's your team size. There's even things like your team location. Are you all together in one HQ or are you spread across the country, spread across the globe? Do you have office space? And even things like the pace of the business, which I'll talk about in a minute. So, again, it's not a one size fits all, but I think if you think about those 3 A's and you think about some of the variations within those, it can start to give you ideas and you can kind of figure out what fit might be right based on your team, based on where you're at. So for audience, you might start with just sales. You have your SDRs, you have your AEs, your leaders. You may over time evolve that. It becomes a go-to-market kickoff or a revenue kickoff. You're including customer success, you're including marketing. You may take that even one step further. I call this go-to-market plus. Lots of people from throughout the business. You're bringing product in. You might be bringing in folks from your services teams, right? You're making it a little bit more of even a company-wide initiative with sales almost acting as the host. Then you've got your atmosphere. Plus one to Kyle's point about, virtual, although I know sometimes we have to do it, it's not ideal. If you have to, you have to. Otherwise, you can start to think about, what's reasonable for us. Could we do an in-office kickoff? Could we do a local offsite where we're in our same, city or state, but we're going somewhere new, somewhere fun, change of scenery? Or are we ready to do that bigger, right? I call it Vegas style offsite where people are, flying and kind of traveling for the event. And then lastly, agenda. Again, no secret sauce here, but you can do a day SKO, especially if people aren't traveling far, or you can do 2 days or 3 days. But something that we'll talk about a little bit later is you want to make sure there's relevance. You want to make sure that you're actually spending that time in a worthwhile manner. That's what's really going to matter there. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is just some of the evolution of SKO in my own life at Klaviyo and now at Elise. At Klaviyo, I was part of 3. The first one we did do virtually thanks to COVID, so did what we could there. And then we kind of climbed up that ladder, like I was mentioning, in terms of getting bigger and better every year. So the second year we did an in-office style. We flew all the US folks to our Boston HQ, And then we had separate regional kickoffs for our London folks in that office and our Sydney folks in that office. And then finally, my last year there, we did the true Vegas kickoff and we flew everyone internationally out to Vegas for a 3-day event. Now at Elise, we actually do kickoffs quarterly. They're much smaller. They're in New York, which is where our HQ is. We fly all of our US employees out, but our business is changing so fast and we're still quite small that it actually makes sense to do it more often.
That's awesome. Really interesting. I think we can all empathize with like the pace of change and sort of how to keep up with all of that. I really like that. Kyle, I want to come back to you because I do subscribe to your newsletter. The word Vegas has been said a lot, and you alluded to this Vegas buffet. Um, Tell me more about kind of that nod you had in your newsletter this week about the Vegas buffet, the
Yeah,
analogy.
so the analogy is just a nod to focus. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make with these in-person moments is there's like 100 different things that you could use that in-person time for. And so we cram it all in. And the Vegas buffet thing is just like you're at the Vegas buffet, you put a little bit of everything on your plate, and then you just end up bloated and sick and feeling like crap. And I think that's how people feel oftentimes coming out of SKO. They've gotten a product roadmap preview, and we've done training on 4 different topics, and then we had a customer interview, and we had this and this and this and this, and it's all very well intentioned because we only get to do this once a year or once every 6 months. It might be the first time you've ever done like a big in-person moment or a kickoff, and we just end up putting too many things in that we think are important, and what ends up happening is none of those things are embedded with any seriousness or lasting impact. And so less is more for these events. And so I would much rather train my team on one topic and go really deep, and going back to 3 points of contact, have a customer panel that discusses some particular topic that's relevant to the training that I'm going to do in breakout groups, and then an activity that then reinforces that training. And then we're going to do a game planning exercise with actual customer accounts that we want to take this new skill and apply it to. The impact of being able to go deep on one skill and actually have people walk out of that like 1 or 2 or 3 days is so much more impactful, because we're battling the forgetting curve. You're gonna lose that information in pretty significant amounts within 48 hours, within 7 days, within a month. And so unless you can really go deep and try to find opportunities to practice that skill, to really like rehearse and embed, then it's well-intentioned, you hit a bunch of topics, but like nothing sticks. So you've tried to do 5 things and you've got 0, as opposed to doing maybe like 2 things, and actually having success with those 2 things. And then you need a reinforcement plan afterwards, but we can come back to that topic. Right. So my call
Yeah.
here is for focus and depth over skimming through a bunch of stuff and having none of it really go anywhere meaningful.
What was that epiphany? What drove you, Alex, or your org to the quarterly SKOs? Is it like you pick one thing and run it, um, or was it for a different reason?
I think for us, like we are just moving so quickly, especially from a product perspective. And so we bake a lot of those sorts of updates and learnings into that cadence.
Hmm.
As far as I know, it was from the jump quarterly, which I think is great. It's not something that I'd experienced before. Of course, it's a smaller scale. It's a 1-day local thing, but gives us the chance to also not put all of our eggs in that, January SKO basket and instead kind of have those reinforcement points throughout the year.
Absolutely. I want to maybe move on to sort of the second topic, um, where we have our ingredients, right? But a recipe is a combination of ingredients and then what to do with the ingredients and the prep. And you spend a lot of time chopping onions and what order do they all go in? And I really love this metaphor again, but I want to go over to you, Mercy, because the engagement design, and I love this line. You sort of alluded to it, Kyle, but repetition is the mother of learning, right? So the Zig Ziglar line. Mercy, I'm really curious. How do you think about these core ingredients and what to do with them to round out the recipe and make sure people learn stuff? Let's just be frank, I'm curious to hear how you think about that.
Yeah, it's such an important question, and I don't have the good food metaphor, but what I do have is like the psychological, scientific evidence that we do not retain information when we're in that state of overload. So, like, if you imagine, I guess, if you were a chef, you have all the ingredients of your sessions, and let's say you've done everything Alex and Kyle just said. Like, you know exactly where you're trying to drive behavior, where you're trying to align the team. You have a full sense of like whether you're doing this at the cadence that's quarterly or annual, and you actually feel like the strategy is there, the tactics have to reflect it. So number one, like paring things down means chunking and sequencing your content. So I always say there's three things that everyone has got to start doing is one, remembering that every single rep is scrolling TikTok, LinkedIn, and Instagram, some combination, maybe Facebook. And what they're doing is their brains are fully dopamine addicted. This is the science. We are all unable to listen for more than 20 to 30 minutes. So if your content at SKO is an hour plus long, if your reps are going to be drowning in slide decks, no matter how great your strategy is, no matter how thoughtful the cadence of your SKO is, you will lose the audience in the room. So first, my number one thing is make sure everyone, including the folks who are responsible for content and facilitating, are thinking about their content being impactful within half an hour. And that doesn't mean there can't be interactive elements after or before, but that we're actually working with the brain. And then the second thing is something called dual coding. And just let me nerd out for 1 second, because like I think about this every single day with my kids. Like I always want to tell my son things, and those are words. That's one way to code meaning. I can use verbal or a slide with text. But what my son tends to get, he's only 3, he gets visuals. So if I tell him, let's go to the store, but I say, let's go to the store and I hold up an apple, it affects his limbic system. Human beings get meaning through visuals, not just words, not just text, but seeing something. It produces an emotion. An emotion is memory glue. So I always say, if you're creating your content for SKO and you have a slide that is mostly text with a small throwaway image, even worse, a GIF or GIF, you are doing yourself a disservice because your team will not be able to retain that information. To reduce cognitive overload, the number one thing I recommend is to have no more than 2 sentences on a slide. This is so hard, by the way. Let me be clear. To get to 2 sentences on the slide, the 2 things that they must remember requires a level of editing and prep that very few SKO facilitators are willing to battle it out with their content creators. So that means you have to actually get folks to get the text-filled slide in 2 weeks before so that you can pare it down with them. But when you combine the image with the text, the thing they must know in words, the thing they must feel in the image, they will remember it better. And then the last one, which is like what I live for, because I've never done this. So I'm about to give advice I have never taken, but I have been to one SKO where this was true, and the energy in the room was completely different. What this person did who held up this go-to-market kickoff is they decided to not group the presentation by department. So when you're in your SKO sessions, most times when you're, in a go-to-market kickoff environment, product gets up, marketing gets up, sales gets up. I don't know, some celebrity who's never sold gets up. But like this idea is that we group by almost like tribe versus back to Kyle's point, back to Alex's point, what are we trying to align on? What are the actual, like, what's the framework here? Okay, we're trying to align people to a message. Let's use an example. Okay, if I was going to create a SKO and it was called, stay curious, like that was the theme. It was all about, getting folks to be more curious, drive discovery questions, expand opportunities. We're all about like growing existing customer ACV. Let's say that was the big directive from the CRO, from the head of go-to-market enablement. Those of us on the ground who are building the sessions and building the structure should actually be thinking to ourselves, do we really need product to go up and talk about things through that lens and then marketing to get up and talk about things through that? No, we create those core sessions and we weave the different departments in. Because what happens then is then product's only doing a few core slides and marketing's doing a few core slides, but then you're actually leaning into the behaviors we want to drive. So I always share like, I haven't done this. Like, I think it's really important. I know everyone likes to get up and be like, these are the three things. I only know that I've experienced this other way. And to do it requires so much upfront prep and communication between departments. And that's why it doesn't happen. It is so hard to get product and marketing and everyone in the room. But if you get them co-designing the content, it will stick in a different way. All right, that's my last little diatribe. But the three things: chunk and sequence, 30 minutes or less content, dual code, word and visual and everything. And last but certainly not least, get everyone in the same room and build together cross-departmentally.
Can I give an example of your
Please.
second thing there, dual coding?
Yeah.
In one of the terms you use there, or phrases, I think is so important. Like, emotion is the glue of memory, you said. It's such an important point, because like, slides are boring, and what you really want to do is share messaging that resonates. And if anybody wants a book on this topic, Made to Stick by the Heath brothers is one of my favorites in this category. And you'll look at your content compared to their framework and be like, oh, all of this sucks. And it's not going to stick. People aren't going to remember it. And so when I was a first-time VP of sales, we had this sense that people were not managing the buying committee very well. We had gone from like way down market to way up market, where multi-threaded buying committees were just like a normal, like the everyday normal way of doing business. But our teams weren't really multi-threading. They weren't testing their champions. They weren't dealing with these buyer dynamics. And so one of the most important things I wanted people to walk away from that half-year kickoff was content around the challenger customer. So understanding who's who in your buying committee, and really understanding if you had a legit champion or not. And so when we introduced this skill and this topic at the beginning, what I did is I asked, and I sort of had this pre-planned, I knew exactly who I was going to call on. So I asked somebody to stand up, one of the reps, and I'm like, okay, I won't call him out on this public webinar, but I'm like, rep number one, like, tell me about XYZ deal. And the rep goes to me, he's like, are you really going to do this to me, man? And in like a joking way, because I was picking a deal that he lost and spent a whole bunch of time on, and afterwards realized that like he never had a good champion and he was getting like strung along. We sold to HR leaders, and they don't know how to say no, and they're very difficult to sell to. And so I had him explain the story, and I had some specific questions that I was prodding at. And one of the questions was like, at what point should you have known that this was a dead end deal? And he was like, well, it's when the like pseudo champion said X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, and let's just calculate together, how many hours of your time did you spend on this deal afterwards? Okay, now let's talk about the time that all of your counterparts spent on the deal. The consulting team, solutions engineering, X, Y, and Z. And this, like, people had a good time with it. People thought this was like a hilarious, painful ordeal to go through. And I picked a rep who everybody liked and would be a good sport about it. And we spent sort of like 5 or 10 minutes unpacking this deal and really like going through this painful journey, because he felt it, everybody around felt it. I was like, okay, great. Thanks so much for being a good sport. Okay, and now rep number 2, you stand up. And there was like a big laugh, and people were like, oh my, and the rep was like, oh my God, you're going to do this to me? I'm like, what deal do you think I'm going to pick? And he knew the deal I was going to have him talk about. And it was like, because it was fun and memorable, but like painful, like we went through really like brutal deals to lose that we wasted a lot of time on. It set the stage now to communicate all of the more structured framework-driven content around how to test a champion, how to know if you've got the right person, how to understand the dynamics of the committee and all of this stuff. And we kept coming back to those stories. And that was the context, that was the glue that held it all together, because it was emotional, it was fun. So just give yourself, like, as you're thinking through content, keep that in the back of your mind. How do you make people feel the thing? How do you make them like hurt a little bit? How do you make them experience the pain of doing that badly? That will then put people, this is called establishing learning relevance. If you go back to like adult learning principles, you can sometimes, it's called andragogy. One of the things it talks about is like when you're teaching adults different than children, you have to convince them why they need to learn that thing. And so this, before you do anything, you want to convince the team why they should want to learn this new skill. And this is I think doing this with like an emotional, fun way makes a lot of sense. One of the parts of the Made to Stick success framework is the E, it's emotional. So that glue was really what held the entire content together. So I'm glad Mercy brought that up.
I love that story. And you did not give them warning. It was a surprise to those 2 reps.
Yeah.
And you were not concerned about
which made it fun.
You didn't even want to say like, hey, I will put you on the spot. I'm not going to tell you like why or how or when.
No, it was way more fun
coming.
to watch them squirm. And
yes.
and like I pretended like I pretended it was just going to be that 1 rep, and then I called on the second rep, and that's what made people really crack up. It was maybe you can't pull that off. Like that rep worked for me in a previous company. We'd been together for like 3 or 4 years at that point, and he was a good sport and people liked him. So you have to be selective. You know, there was other people that I could have called on that would have like really hated that experience.
Buckled. Yeah. And other stakeholders were in there, like of the org, like marketing was in the room, product was in the room. Everyone was in the room.
Big time, because one of the things that we were also talking about is like how to hand off relationships really well from sales to implementation. Mercy made a great point about weaving. I couldn't agree more. We try to do that. I try to do that even with just like core team training on a monthly basis. Teach skills that cross multiple functions and explain it in different ways. So that's another great principle to take.
Yeah, I kind of want to go back. That's great, Kyle. I love that story. I might like half borrow, half use, half steal that story. I want to go back to this concept of weaving, Mercy, and think about like Alex touched on this framework. She's like, I like frameworks. I like threes. I know we all do. Mercy, you have this analogy. It's outside of the food analogy, so I'm just gonna fair warning, but it's the plan like a producer, content editor. I don't want to steal your metaphor. I really like that metaphor, and thinking about the challenge of bringing everybody in the room. How do you avoid this round robin of like, okay, now your department go. Is it on theme? Okay, see you later, and let's move along, right? How do you basically implement weaving with cross-functional teams, leaders who have other things going on? How do you get their time? How do you start approaching this thing like a production company a little bit, from your experience on enablement and maybe at Webflow, maybe anywhere else, but I'm really curious how you think about that, to not ask such a loaded question.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go back to the food metaphor first because I'm hungry, and because I'm with 2 just deeply strategic leaders. I mean, Alex and Kyle, as you're talking and as I'm thinking about, where I can bring value, this isn't the food metaphor. This is the one that always comes up for me when I get ready for SKO planning, SKO anything. There are people in your company who are bows, and there are people who are arrows, and one is not better than the other. What I mean by that, there are people who innately think of things through macro strategy. I think you can hear it and feel it in Alex and Kyle, the way they're talking about the framework, the building of, and then like you're asking me a question about the tactics. And so often when we come to tactical and IC work, there's like this conflation of it with being junior, but I'm like a true IC. All right. Like I'm not ahead of, I'm like, give me the bow, the direction, and then let me fly. Because here's what's going to happen when you have to actually plan SKO. And not everyone's built for this part. It is being house whip. If you go back to politics, it's like going to DC and getting everyone together, aligned, conferring one-on-one, dealing with the emotional fear of speaking. Like you might have to be like really and truly, it's like a Hollywood production. Plan like a producer. Who do we need? Let's do the rewrites, the thoughtful editing. Let's refine the content, right? And then the most important thing of like the journey as an IC, if you're actually in charge of putting it on, strategy's been made, slides are in. Imagine a movie that's really good has thought about what it wants to make you feel when, and you are going to want your SKO to engineer dopamine. I'm going to like, I'm going to go back to school for neuroscience, because this is the thing that I'm most intrigued by, is how we will spend all this energy building slide decks that sales reps drown in. But we didn't ever really think about the magic moments because we're so busy making the slide decks. So think about this. If you are in charge of being the arrow, the one who's going to drive the strategy that was created, imagine that this is your opportunity. Everyone's thinking about the content. Think about the moments around the content. Are you going to have stand-ups? Are you going to have interactive moments? Kyle, when you were telling that story, I was like, oh my God. I feel like people probably learned more about your style of leadership, felt more connected to you. Some people who might have thought about leaving the company stayed, like what's going to happen. Like there's probably some intangibles to those types of moments. And it is the job of the people putting on the show to come up with them. If we're lucky, you get a CRO who's going to think of them. You might get a head of enablement who thinks of them. But if you're an IC, it is your job to be thinking about what maybe the folks in the strategy room aren't. And that is those moments of dopamine, of laughter, of even fear. Fear isn't a healthy thing. Standing up, everyone was probably like, oh shit, is he going to call on me next? But they were listening and then they were laughing. That's your job too. Yeah.
I love that. I think about that story, Kyle, if you were brand new and you knew no one in the room, you know what I mean? Some audience members might not have that level of familiarity with certain reps who you're like, I know this can work, like I know I can pull this and it'll work. I find that kind of interesting. I want to be cognizant of time, and I want to talk about something that is extremely important to all of this. And get it back to you, Alex. And the topic really is, all right, so we're at SKO, or SKO is over, and we want to understand if all of that time, effort, and money was worth it. And we want to measure this thing. I'd love to hear your framework. Let's go back to the F word of how you think about that. Who asks you those questions internally? Like, how quickly do they come to someone like you? How would you answer that? How do you think about this? What have you learned along the way? Yeah, curious what you think.
Yeah, I want to start with one thing that Kyle said earlier, which is the concept of trying to focus on one thing. So before we even think about how we're measuring or, the details of that process, it's can we get really clear on why we're doing SKO in the first place? And especially if we're thinking about, ultimate behavior change, let's take with the audience of a sales rep. What is that one thing that we want to focus? What is that one outcome that we're driving towards? Because that's going to really define how you look at this, and it's going to make the outcome much more realistic. Because to his previous point, if we're doing that Vegas style buffet, we're not going to have that aha moment. We're not going to have the ability to continue to build on that thing and actually drive something measurable, impactful after the fact. So I want to put that out there to start. One other thing is SKO is in part measured on how people feel during and after. So it's unlike a lot of the other trainings and programs that happen throughout the year. So SKO still does have this concept of like satisfaction, whether you agree that that's a useful measure or not. I think that it inevitably comes into play, right? How did people feel? What are they saying, right? That is always a thing. So you have to keep that in mind. That kind of goes to Mercy's points about like production and all of that. It's just a big piece of the puzzle. But with any program, SKO has that concept of leading and lagging indicators. So for anyone who's not familiar, right, leading is what can we measure either at or shortly after the event? And then lagging is typically what can take months or even quarters to see through. So if I think about Kyle's initial recipe of like driving connection, building skills, driving alignment, when I think of leading indicators, That's in part kind of those warm and fuzzies, right? It's measuring connection and alignment, which is really hard. This is the simple part of the equation. That's a lot of times where surveys come in. It's probably your most important survey of the year. I'm not always a big fan of surveys. I think they're often poorly done. We're asking questions and getting answers that we can't really do anything with. But I do actually see a lot of value in putting forward surveys for SKO to get an idea of how people felt about the event. And that can honestly be everything from the travel logistics, the hotel, all the way through, of course, to the sessions, any other sorts of trainings and other things that took place. Because those bits and pieces, it's part of the experience, and we do want that to be, documented so that we can improve year over year. Lagging, however, is where I think we're really seeing, right, the impact. This to me is what like really ultimately matters. And those lagging indicators are related to that concept of building skills. So it's just like if you think about a solid enablement program, like we're training to drive a specific outcome. And whatever outcome that is, whatever that one thing is that Kyle mentioned, should really be aligned with the goals or the focus for the year to come. So it could be a bunch of things, right? It could be maybe we're facing headwinds because one of our competitors is expanding, and we're going to have a really concentrated effort on competitor conversations and objection handling. Maybe like our business model is shifting and we're going to start doing more outbound. And so we're going to focus on, new best practices for prospecting. Maybe we're launching a huge new product and we need to be fast to market and connect our buyer's pain to its value in order to hit a specific target in H1, right? The point is there's going to be that one thing, and that is what that training at SKO gets attached to. However, I think this can probably go unsaid, but I'll say it anyway. Results don't happen in a day or two or three. So you can get there and you can do the best workshop of your career. But it doesn't mean that when they leave, they get on the plane, they get back to the office, they shut their computer. It doesn't mean anything is going to change and anything is going to happen, because behavior change is not that simple. So I like to think about when I was learning Spanish. I was really lucky at Klaviyo. We had this awesome benefit for a while where I got this instructor paid for, and I could do these weekly sessions. And we'd have a little session and we talk through certain concepts. And I was like, okay, yeah, I got this. And then the next day I'd go and try to say something, and it was like I never had that session at all, right? Oh my gosh, what was that word? Oh no. So in your head, you're sitting at SKO and you're like, oh yeah, I got this. Like discovery, got it. A week later, you're on with a prospect, might as well have not even been there, right? And that is the thing that we have to keep in mind. And so, Chris, for your framework, I love this concept that I call the reinforcement triangle. So just think of a triangle that has 3 points. The top point is what good looks like. That means anytime I want someone to improve or begin a new behavior, they have to know what's good. So with my Spanish teacher, right, he was saying the words, he was enunciating, he was kind of telling me about, you know, clearly I didn't retain that much from these lessons, but what words go with what, right? All of that conjugation. So that's what good look like. Then the second point of the triangle is practice. You have to do the thing to be able to do the thing. So that would be talking with him on those sessions. That would be talking with friends who speak Spanish, right? Doing some Duolingo on the side. And then third is coaching. I can sit in my room and I can speak Spanish to myself in the mirror all day, but I don't even really know if I'm doing it right or wrong at a certain point. So I need someone along the way to kind of give me that input and say, yes, that was right. No, this was wrong. Try this, try that. So when I think about SKO, I think it's a great opportunity for those first 2 points of the triangle. What does good look like? What are we expecting of you? And let's give you a stage to practice. And so you can think about that time together. It's so critical. to be able to hear from each other, hear other people try, right? Have those conversations, get that FaceTime. And then where real results come is when you go home or right back to the office, and we want to continue with practice and coaching, practice and coaching. And that's where I think I just saw a comment from Mercy pop up. The managers are a massive part of that. And you'll probably get some other great what good looks like examples along the way that you can share. And so if there's anything that you leave this session with from a metrics perspective, it's that number one, think about those SKO trainings or workshops being interactive and focused on what good looks like and practice. And then ensure that you have a plan post SKO to use that triangle, use that reinforcement triangle to get that repetition of practice and coaching. Because ultimately, especially depending upon the skill, it's going to take time for people to make those changes and then for you to see those business outcomes.
I love
Couldn't
that
agree
so
more.
much. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No,
Okay,
you
the
go ahead,
thing,
Mercy.
well, I was just loving how, first of all, this is the section I'm seeing the most like comments in the chat, and I think it's like hitting on something that most of us can relate to. In you speaking, Alex, something that came up was, whoa, why is it so often that we don't present to the field what good looks like? Is it because we're not sure? Because sometimes when you're launching a new product or something is shifting, the what could look like to start that we're introducing them to at a kickoff and then reinforcing through the year is actually a hypothesis. And I notice, like, especially, I don't know if this is more recent because of the way tech is shifting and the job market is shifting. No one wants to make any big calls that are wrong and put themselves out, their necks out there. But sometimes we're just like, we don't just say the thing explicitly of like what we expect. You know, we say, oh, scripts aren't needed. Let's just give a framework. You know, sometimes we actually need to give the like, this is what great sounds like on a call. And this is what great sounds like in expansion. And this is what we expect at each stage. Because actually, you're right. In 4 months, there'll be a rep doing it different and better. But we'll all be doing better having started somewhere where we put our bet down. Like, this is what we think is a good first way to X, Y, or Z. So I'm just reminded, like, a lot of this is also about having a point of view, leadership having a point of view, and saying what the standard is so it can be coached to, reinforced, and introduced for practice. Yeah.
I think that's super interesting. But the velocity of SKOs at EliseAI, Alex, you're definite like, how do you think about showing them what good looks like and also being vulnerable to we're all gonna find out, if that makes sense? It's sort of like if things are so new, there's a large element of this that is not proven. And we can either present what good looks like or we can present what we hope things look like. But how do you think about reinforcing something that is just new? It's not proven, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. You know, honestly, I think a big, big part of it comes down to the folks that you hire on your sales team to build a business from the ground up. We have some really awesome AEs who recognize that sometimes we're taking a guess and they have to do some experimentation on their part. So typically from an enablement perspective, I would say to Mercy's point, we give it our best guess, right? We may even
Hmm.
lean on if we're talking about, let's say, product positioning. Let's
Hmm.
talk to people who built the product, right? They're going to probably have a better guess than me. Let me put my sales spin on it. Let's go. Let's try it. And then
Hmm.
have those core AEs that are funneling feedback, right? I'm listening to calls and then create that environment of, hey, we're going to iterate. That's expected. And in fact, that's good because if we're
Hmm.
iterating on this, it means we're getting better at it. And it means as soon as you start to change now and you try this new version, you're going to sell more, right? And the flywheel continues. So I think it's very, very common, especially in small orgs. And it does require folks who are kind of in for that journey.
Hmm. Absolutely. I wanted to maybe end on the metrics topic. Over to you, Kyle. Thinking about the first thing Alex said, which was you all need to agree on why we're doing this, right? Um, do you think about measurement and like to add to that framework? So it's like, why are we doing this? We want to drive this one thing, and we have a really simple, clear measurement in mind before we go do the SKO, so that we know that we can, like that we're not like fumbling around post SKO figuring out how do we measure efficacy here. We had it in advance. That was something that I thought of as Alex kicked off. How do you think about that?
Always. You always need a metric for almost anything that you do, or else you have no idea if that thing is successful or not. Yeah, there's some brand stuff and like some exceptions, but in general, one of the things that we do that's a good example here and ties in is every single month, each team has a focus area. So there's like 2 or 3 things that we are collectively putting energy behind as a business. And there's always some metric that we're trying to move. And so every week we're revisiting that. And in the following monthly business review, we look at, okay, we wanted to improve our conversion rates from intro to disco. And so we were doing this training. Did that have an effect? Did the people that got better scores in the WorkRamp certifications improve their disco to demo conversion rates by more or less? And so same thing with SKOs or RKOs, and similar to Alex's point, yeah, I want to know what that metric is ahead of time, and then I want to know what the reinforcement plan is for the 30, 60, 90 days afterwards. And so if I were to run an SKO today, the focus area for the following month would basically be whatever we taught at SKO, and then we would be trying to move that metric each month. And so you absolutely need to know what that is before you start building anything.
Absolutely. Anything to add there, Alex, Mercy?
I think from an enablement perspective, like doubling down on the one thing, but also adding how specific can we make that one thing? So I kind of rattled off like a couple of potential, focuses for SKO. And like one, for example, I talked about competitive positioning. It's a really big thing to say, we are going to improve competitive win rates across the board, especially if you have several nuanced major competitors. It starts to become even more actionable when you say we're going to increase competitive win rate against X competitor. And the same thing can go for if we're talking about a new product release, right? We're talking about new maybe pipeline dollars or new closed dollars for X product, not every product we have. And I say that in part for any of the enablement leaders on the call, because I think sometimes we can focus on one thing, but it is one really, really big thing. And when possible, the more narrowed we can get, the more focused we all become, and the more likely it is that we're actually going to stay consistent and drive to that critical outcome.
This is a thing that enablement, I think, struggles with a lot in general, is being really specific and metrics driven about what you're trying to move the needle on. And sometimes it's hard to measure stuff, but you need to put in the effort to be able to do it. And now there's so many tools out there that finally make this possible. Like we use Momentum for a bunch of stuff. And so when we teach something, we usually build a momentum prompt and then some field that we're trying to use to capture that thing. It's so like an example is we want our reps to be better at mentioning the customers that are around the prospect. We call it local name drop or local name credibility. And so we built a field and then a momentum prompt to review every single transcript and show us how many local customers did that rep mention, and like there's a yes or no checkbox on it as well, so that you can start to gather this information. With LLMs, this has become much more possible. Gong trackers were fine, but like only mediocre. You couldn't really push the information. Now with stuff like Momentum and other tools in that category, I would highly encourage all enablement leaders to get more consistent about like having a metric and really like not accepting like, oh, we can't really measure that, or having it be soft. Like, no, like put your foot down with RevOps and be like, hey, we're spending all of this time and energy of the enablement team's time, the sales manager's time, the frontline launch specialist time. Like we need to know if we can actually move the metric. That's just like a general piece of insight that I would give to folks, but also very in-person gathering relevant.
Mercy, I saw some head nodding.
I don't know. It's like, is this the time to talk about AI? I don't know, probably not. But it just reminded me that between, the opportunity for folks to make GPTs or to be using LLMs in basically the way that reps are calling upon and retrieving information has changed so much in the last year. If you want to measure the impact of like enablement in your deals, start building GPTs that reps are using in their deals so you can attach it to pipeline. Make sure you're structuring your templates and your messaging in such a way that you can track what messages are influencing ops. There's a lot that can be built to Kyle's point. It's getting a lot easier. I think there's AI inside of our existing software stack, like a Gong, where it's obviously doing tons of stuff, but you also can just like straight up use the Anthropics. You can just straight up using ChatGPT to be building the learning there. So AEs are referencing it, so that SDRs are referencing it. That's a whole other topic, but SKO is just the beginning, I think is what I'm getting, is that kickoffs are the start and then the reinforcement is everything. So don't be exhausted at the end of your kickoff so that you can't do the reinforcement stuff, which is I think what happens to many of us. We get really tired. So anyway.
I think this has been great. I really appreciate all these inputs. I sort of want to see where like things go a bit freeform via Q&A and via the chat. Why don't we take a few minutes? Call it 7, call it 6. I have my eyes on the chat. I would love to hear from you, anything on your mind, and we can just maybe it's a pick 'em, um, on the Q&A section. But do you have anything on your mind? Write it in the chat. And if you don't, I have more questions for Mercy to fill the time. So feel free. And maybe as he's come in, I love my personal, I learn best by like the wrong way. I don't know if there's a more eloquent way to say that, but like I love learning the hard way. Sometimes I think it's kind of the way I learn best. Um, Maybe a quick round robin on a lesson learned, maybe the hard way in this topic of SKO planning. Maybe Mercy, if you have something that comes to mind. We have a question that came in.
Yeah, we have a question.
Let's do that one. Stakeholder management piece for SKO. How do you handle competing priorities from stakeholders when building out content and sessions? I would say Mercy or Alex or Kyle, but someone go.
Yeah. I will just say one thing quickly while other folks can chime in, which is this has a lot to do with documentation. So it can often feel like when we're asking stakeholders to show up in a certain way, it's like these are a ton of asks we're making, and it can feel really like almost like personal. But if you have a kickoff for your kickoff, like a session where all stakeholders are there, expectations are communicated, dates and deliverables are communicated, you're actually just holding people to what they agreed on in that meeting. And so my number one recommendation is like, if there isn't a single source of truth for your SKO, where you can see names, dates, and I even sometimes just put a little checkbox in there, like acknowledged or whatever, so that someone actually has to touch it and say, I said yes to this. Because what that will do is it'll make it a lot easier to manage them. And there's no competing priority to the kickoff of a go-to-market team. There should be nothing higher than that. And if there is, maybe it needs to be someone else who steps in to stakehold. So you can tell I'm passionate about this one because I don't know, we're all getting paid by having our reps make, revenue for the company. So it is a P1, no matter the team the leader's on.
Kyle, what would you add to that?
You have to put your foot down because stakeholders are going to add a bunch of stuff. You're like, oh, but this is important and this is important. And you just have to force the trade-off conversation. That's like, I swear, half of building startups is like being diligent about forcing the trade-off conversation and deciding what you're saying no to. And so like get your key people in a room and facilitate the conversation. Say, hey, SKO is coming up or RKO is coming up. There's space for 3 major items, 3 major themes. It could be anything you want. So let's put them on a page and let's horse trade and figure out, okay, if there's something that's number 1 most important for sales, number 2 most important for CS, and that's the same thing, that's an easy win. Well, what if it's number 6 for sales and number 1 for CS? Like, does that make the agenda? Do we do a breakout? Like, forcing that conversation is challenging, but you have to do it or else they'll ruin your SKO.
I love that idea of having all the stakeholders stack rank their 1 through 6, so that if you could just easily point to, hey, you had this highly ranked, so did I. I like that a lot. Actually, I think that's a great suggestion. Alex, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think I would just double down on what was said. It starts with that initial planning. The more you can solidify the why and what is that one focus, right? What's the theme, all of those high level pieces, the easier it becomes to get alignment. And then I think similar to Mercy's point, I like getting people together in a room and saying, okay, well, if you want to do that, then so and so can't do this. So go ahead, let's talk it out right here. So initial planning for sure, and that kind of documentation, as Mercy called it, and then having the group come together and just seek that alignment with everybody that's participating, with all of those stakeholders, and get it locked in, and then hit the road with the actual build of the content.
Absolutely. I think that is a great way to end, as we're almost at time. I do want to say big thanks, huge thanks to our panel, Mercy, Alex, and Kyle. I really enjoyed the discussion. I hope the audience did too. And one of my big takeaways right now is there is no shortage of things to do and think about. Like, the amount of energy that is required to do anything right that we just talked about and more is substantial. And I think that's a quick tie-in to quick plug for Marco, is there's a lot of other things involved too. There is like 100 rooms and meeting spaces and a food and bev program and all these like event logistics to get these people together. So quick plug for Marco would be, we do that for you. Let us move these things out of the way so you can focus all of your time and energy on thinking about the hard stuff: alignment, jobs to be done, measuring success. Attack this thing like an event producer. Incite dopamine like a stunt director is what you said, Mercy, I think. So I just want to say thank you so much. I really enjoyed today's discussion, Mercy, Alex, Kyle. And I think that's kind of a wrap.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
And thanks everyone for
Thanks,
joining.
everybody.
Take care.